Alright, so if you see in this first image here, we've got the orb structure made out of paper mache. I covered it in silicone followed by a resin to harden the entire structure. I thought I had video of how I made it, but I don't. Basically what I did is I took a rubber ball, some sticks, some popsicle sticks, bunch of tape, and basically made this loose form that I could then mold paper mache over slowly to kind of get the shape I wanted to start with. Besides applying just the silicone, I also ended up getting some resin together and pouring that over it to give it an extra rigidity. But the reason this was necessary is since it was all made out of paper mache and it had dried out, that's what caused it to harden. I was afraid once I put it in the mold, it would just start absorbing that texture and then completely ruin the cast. I was having a bit of trouble trying to get the mold to fit into the other mold that I was making, so I kind of had to keep shaving off parts of it. Once I could get it to fit, I quickly noticed that I'd have no way to pull it back out of the mold after the mold started setting up, which I'd have to remove it so I can have the negative to pour resin into. So I had to somehow attach a handle so I could get the damn thing out, which even so still wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Mixing this stuff up was super annoying. Basically, I had like 20 seconds to like 2 minutes even there. I had to mix it all up with no clumps, which was a bitch and a half. And I had to do that before it started drying out, because after that 2-minute mark, the entire thing starts solidifying and I need to have the mold in there by that. But also, if I have any clumps in the powder, it would fuck it up too. I had to figure out how to hold it just above the bottom of the bucket, because if it would have been touching the bottom of the bucket, it would have left a gap on the top of the sphere, which would have been no good. So I had to like kind of hold it there and wait for it to solidify. So once I got it out and was ready to start pouring, I had to dump out all the condensation that had been held inside of the container just from sitting overnight, because it needed a good day to cure. And I got fiber optics because I knew I was going to want fiber optics to be running throughout so that I could disperse the light better. So I gave them a focal point, and that's why I taped together the fiber optics, is so I could have somewhere to directly place the light on to get the effect I wanted. And I ran those into it, but before doing so I had filled the negative with water and then poured that into one of my measuring cups, so I knew how much void I had to fill, and then I marked that out so that I could get the right quantity in one pour, since this stuff is a 2-part 1-to-1 ratio and it's not very forgiving, and I didn't want a layered effect by having to do it again or too much spillover. So that's what you see me doing here. So the 2-part resin I'm working with in this scene is basically mostly used for wood applications, but after seeing how it reacted when I made the key out of keys, I kind of thought, yeah, I can kind of do anything with this stuff. And I think that was a big part of what moved forward my idea to finally try and replicate in a realer sense your showreel image, because I've always really liked that one. So knowing that this could be somewhat see-through, like on the keys, it looks like the keys are right on top of the top layer, but in reality there's about a good 1/4 of an inch before the first keys. So I was like, okay, if I take this and add some dye, can I give it the right effect? And I had actually tried to a small extent the day before to see how it would take food coloring dye, which, yeah, it was a little iffy, but I really didn't know what else to dye it with. I thought paint would be too aggressive and might break down, but food coloring, you dye eggs with food coloring. So when you mix the 2 parts, basically it starts to harden fairly quickly, like an epoxy. I mean, it takes a full 24 hours to dry, but I'm adding dye to it, and I knew to some extent what I'd need to achieve the color I wanted through some tests the day before. And wanting to mix a little easier, because this stuff isn't fun to mix, I basically took 2 popsicle sticks and splayed it, and then some tape, hooked it up to my drill, and was like, fucking good enough. And, you know, it worked. Worked really well. So I mixed it up with the food coloring, adding a little bit, trying to get as close as I could get to what it looked like in that image, or my interpretation of it, because art's a little subjective. But then here where I'm pouring it and getting ready to pour, I'm trying to position the fiber optic cables, because once I got that poured in there, I mean, there's no more adjustments to be made. That's a wrap. And I pretty much only had one shot at this just because of the time frame I was working with before you got here, and I think I had done this shot about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I knew there'd be a lot of polishing on it, just because that's how these projects tend to go, especially when I'm working with stuff that I'm inexperienced with. So this was kind of a first attempt at a project like this, but I think it was turning out really well, and I really liked how deep the purple came to. I don't feel like I got the same blue hues, but I thought maybe the light would make it replicate it closer. You'll notice in the first phase of this project, I figured I'd just add this in to show you. Like, in the first couple times you'll see it, I have this red board I'm setting everything on for the base, which, as you'll see, isn't what I went with for the end result. I basically tried this reddish stain on some wood, and I really just didn't care for how it turned out. Felt like it took away more than it added to the project, but yeah, that's kind of why I started on it early, is because, yeah, you never know halfway down the road what you're gonna think is a bad idea after you thought it was a good idea for so long, and once you start seeing the pieces come together. Now, this is the part of the project I think I was stressing the most out about, because at this point, you know, I'm pot committed. I use my mold thing, I use most of my liquid 2-part compound, I run the fiber optic. Basically, this was a huge question mark, and if I opened this up and it wasn't what I wanted, the whole project's just for nothing, like it wasn't going to work. So the whole time I'm sitting there trying to get it apart as careful as possible. First problem I run into, well, it won't come out of the damn bucket. like it's got too much suction or something. It's supposed to pull out. So the other reason I couldn't come from the top and just start pulling stuff out is because like I had poured enough on the base of it at the top. It was so hard, there was nowhere to reach. It was just a rock. So I basically had to cut the bucket in half, which I'm also glad I did, because it was kind of cool to see it like this. It's like, I don't know, giant flan or something. Flan. But I was really initially just happy with the color. I thought it was really what I was aiming for, so that was a good sign to start it off. Now this stuff all basically is some weird consistency, but because of all the contours to it, it just wasn't coming apart when I tried to pull on it, and I was still nervous, like, well, had it been in there not breathing? Has it not been able to harden? If I start pulling on this, am I going to make the whole thing fall apart and just complete waste of time? So I was going at it pretty carefully. Like you see here, I take the razor blade and I just kind of quarter it out. And then when I remove this first chunk here, I see that the sphere's in good condition. It's looking fairly well, so I start pulling away around the sphere. I am noticing something that's bothering me off the bat is that the sphere itself is not completely hardened near the bottom, because basically when I poured this resin in, water that still remained in it from condensation, it kind of separated and got into the top of the sphere portion. So at the top of this thing, it's not quite hard yet. So I was a little nervous working with it, you know, like how's the rest of it going to be? Am I going to have solidity throughout? Am I going to have some of this just kind of corn syrupy status to it? So I was starting to get worried that the entire thing was shot and I wasn't going to be able to do it. And really, it was around this point I started asking you questions regarding the project, just to get some clarification on like coloring or design things. When I was asking about the stones, and then I kind of like put it off as like, oh, I'm doing a painting, which I also thought was a good idea, so I kind of did the painting so I could continue asking questions, as if you would have ever known the difference, since it doesn't matter what I'm saying I'm doing, you weren't there. But I ended up doing the painting anyway, just kind of a fun experience. I hadn't painted in a while, and it was nice to start getting back into it, so it turned out being good. But as I'm peeling off the rest of it here, I was starting to get a look at the entire structure as a whole, see what I wanted to change. It looks super dark in this shot, but that's mostly just the lighting. I'm out there in a shitty LED light on my porch, so it looks a lot darker in this picture than I ended up having to deal with. But you can see I had the fiber optic cables just preposterously long, and that was really because I didn't know yet where I was running them to or what my idea was there. I just knew I wanted them in there, so I figured, hey, it's easier to cut them than it is to grow them back. Two problems here. Grinder bent the metal, too rigid to even use for this project. Now, for the stone cutting part, use a chisel, use a saw, smoked a cigar. But as you can see, in the start here, it's fairly light out when I start doing this. And as I'm sitting here carving away at the stone and everything, you're gradually seeing the sunset in the background, which is like one of those points when people are like arguing about how perfect rocks were back in the day. I started out with mostly a square, and to get it the rest of the way to the square, it took a long freaking time. Like, alright, so as you see in the back of this video here, I got a little bunny. Basically, I was driving home, walking through the parking lot, and I saw this bunny hopping around, so I spent 10 minutes catching it, and then I put it in a cage so I could pal around with it while I worked. And yeah, I did let it go. I didn't kill it or anything. What you see me doing right now is I'm basically cutting out the triangles out of some flashing tin with tin snips. It works a lot better than the steel I was using. I'm also using a Dremel to clean up on the sculpture a bit. They were just like sharp edges, things that didn't really work for it, so I had to like grind them down a bit. And I started trying to map out the geodesic sphere, which took some artistic discretion on that one, and ended up changing it up a little bit because it just, my form wasn't quite spherical enough, and geodesic spheres are a little complicated. But I did end up screwing it to the board that night, I believe. Drilled some holes for the fiber optic to go through right there so I could have a central point for the light. And I also cut out and drilled around the base because I kind of realized, if I'm going to have electronics on this, I'm going to have like an open gap in the bottom to fit it all, because it wasn't thick enough to like countersink in all of that. It just wasn't realistic. So basically this was my solution was, well, I guess it's going to have a bigger stand footing then, which ended up to be extremely annoying, but in the end I think it was the right way to go with it. I don't make things terribly straight, but I planned on doing something over the base anyway. I also put some sealant over the top of the wood and sand the sealant, test everything sitting on there. But I really just was not liking how the base took away from things. And my initial light test, it just added a little color to the bottom of it, so I'm kind of glad I did it, because that red, when the light comes on, kind of reflects up in there and adds a little bit to it. So it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Then I had to mix up this small batch with a color match of the resin to go over the top of everywhere I sanded. Basically, once you sand that resin, it starts to get real rough and cloudy. So you kind of have to sand it down, or after you sand it down, you kind of have to recoat it. Then I took an LED flashlight, a fairly bright one I found, and I basically broke it down into all of its smallest elements and broke the hell of it. I then glued in the LED light there, and I started building a base. I needed something to hold the batteries, so I got that going and strapped it down. So the batteries can be changed, they're just in there a little snug. As long as the asses are touching and the wires are touching them, they're fine. Then I drilled out a hole in the side for where the button can go, so you can click it on and off, and a couple of posts to secure the wires to prevent movement. But one of the things I found out really soon is the wire I was testing it with, the gauge was too thick to carry the current of the two AAAs. So I had to size it down to a smaller wire to make it work. Fortunately, I had some sprinkler wire, which comes in a bundle of 5 wires at around a 12 to 14 gauge. So I just took out a few different strands of different colors, so I could denote which ones were different, and I started wiring them up. And then when I tested the light, it worked perfectly, so it was a good call to step down the wires. So the next part of this whole process was to take all those little triangles I cut out of the flashing tin and start adhering them to the surface. So I tried a bunch of different glues to see which kind of results I would get. And then part of the pain in the ass was when I went and opened up my 3 different types of glue, most of them were no longer working. So I had to go for a store run, which I had to cut that out because I just left the camera going on time lapse while I was gone to the store. But once I found out which glue works the best, it ended up being Crazy Glue was the best for this project to get the metal to stick to the resin. I had to start the tedious process of applying each of the triangles, and then the Crazy Glue will adhere very quickly. However, it's kind of watery, so you have to hold it there for long enough for it to start setting up a little. And I was using needle nose pliers too, and this just became super tedious. The other problem was I'd inevitably get the glue on my gloves, then my gloves would stick to the side of it and rip open like you kind of see there. No easy way to do it. So eventually I did get them all placed in a way I was more or less happy with.
Of your mind over changes I never made for you. We had no more than we'll ever make. With heaven on my mind and hell will I believe. When the stage lights come down breaking over me, heaven is a dream. Heaven is a dream. I believe but never would have been. Heaven is a dream. Heaven is a dream. I'm an American hero, baby. Stars spangled in my manner, shaking every man's hand in the presidential manner. You say I would do anything to hear you say, there goes an American hero, darling. Call the press and tell him all. He's got a front page picture face with all of the amenities. If you really don't mind, take me as I am, take me as I am. When you get a chance, take your time, I understand. Believe me when I say I carry all my sins, and I would do anything for you to love me. Call me an American hero. Call me an American hero. Call me an American. I'll live if and when you want me to, when and if I've honored you, and if I miss you when you do not. Real talk. You read fuck up in my walk. Do you see fuck up on my face? Do I mean anything at all? Don't say you love me if you do got nothing else to say to me, when heaven is a dream and reality is fictional, fictional. Constantine and every host of Christendom will carry them, bury them with every last one of us. America is just a dream, just a dream. Pretty thing, nothing's ever what it seems. Just a dream. I still scream